we have the privilege to have a man of God. And we are going to listen the voice of God through his servant, Pastor Homer Trecartin. Please, Pastor, help me to welcome Pastor Homer.
Thank you, Pastor Aguero. Thank you very much. It's good to be back home, in a way at least, although things are a lot different from when we were here many years ago. The global mission centers that I work with at the General Conference are ones that were set up back in 1990 to help us reach the groups of people we have really struggled to reach for many years. The Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, Jews, secular postmodern and urban. And I'll talk more about that and about the Tent Maker program this afternoon. Let's bow our heads and pray. Father, we just want to pray again that your Holy Spirit will be here filling each of us, and that your message will be what comes to our hearts, that you will show us how to be involved in the mission of your church so that you can come soon. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Pastor J.M. Kajur was kneeling quietly in a little room next to the meeting hall. A series of meetings were getting ready to start. It was the first night. And as he was kneeling there in that room praying, suddenly the door burst open and in rushed a very angry man with a gun pointed at Pastor Kajur. He was shouting, "Get out or I will kill you. We don't want Christians in this village." Pastor Kajur was shocked, hadn't expected anything like that, and scared to death, of course. If he didn't get shot, he was afraid that he would die of a heart attack or something. But he heard himself say to the man, laughing, "Put your toy away." Now, that's not exactly what you would usually say to a man who's got a gun pointed at you. You don't call it a toy. And the man was angry, and he started to shake, and he started to scream at him, "This isn't a toy. It's loaded. It's real, and I will kill you now unless you leave." And just then there was a noise at the door. It opened, and in came a group of global mission pioneers, just as that angry man turned around and raced out of the door. Pastor Kajur was shaking. His face was white. He said to the global mission pioneers, "Brothers, I think we better cancel the meeting for tonight. We'll have it later or we'll have it somewhere else, but this isn't the time. That man just threatened my life and all of us, and we better cancel the meeting." The global mission pioneers said, "Pastor, please don't cancel the meeting. We've been preparing for months for this. The people are ready. They're there, out there now, waiting to listen to God's word. We need to go ahead with the meeting." And finally, Pastor Kajur said, "Okay." And he half muttered to them and to himself, "If I perish, I perish." As he walked onto the platform that night, you can imagine he was having trouble thinking about the message. His mind was going round and round. I wonder what it feels like to be shot. He was half expecting that at any moment a shot would ring out and he would fall down dead or dying. He actually saw people coming into the meeting with their hand hidden under their coat. He saw people with big lumps under their robes. He was sure that this was his last night on earth. But the meeting went on and nothing happened. The next night, he again saw people coming in with their hand under their coat, people with lumps under their robes, and nothing happened. And the next, and the next, and the next, and gradually he forgot about that first night and that angry man. Then one night, toward the end of the meetings, as he again knelt in that little room beside the meeting hall, he was praying and he heard someone knock at the door. "Come in," he said. and immediately wished he hadn't because it was that same man again. The man held up his hands and he said, "Pastor, don't be afraid. I didn't bring my gun tonight." He said, "You see, Pastor, my friends and I came and we were determined to kill you that first night. We said we're going to kill him after the meeting. We had our guns, we had our knives, we had our clubs, we were ready. But," he said, "you said some good things that first night, some very interesting things, and we decided we can't kill him tonight. Everybody will think we disagreed with what he said, so we'll kill him tomorrow night instead." And he said, "The next night we came and we were ready. We had our guns and our clubs and our knives. But you said some more good things, some more very interesting things, and we said, we can't kill him tonight, we'll kill him tomorrow night." And he said, "We've been coming every night, and my heart is changed." And he said, "I want to give my heart to Jesus and be baptized." On the day of the baptism, Pastor Kajur waded out into the water, and that man was the first man coming out to be baptized. The people were on the shore, the candidates were lined up. It was an emotional time for everybody. But just as the pastor raised his hand and began to get ready to baptize that man, he saw the Global Mission pioneers rushing out into the water, and they were waving at him, "No, no, no." And he stopped and whispered to them, What's the matter?" They said, "We don't know what's the matter, but do you see all those policemen back there on the shore? We don't know what's going on, but we think we better cancel the baptism and we'll have it another day, another place." And the pastor said, "Wait a minute. When this man threatened me and I was wanting to cancel the meetings, you said no, and I think we ought to go ahead with the baptism. If those policemen want to watch the baptism, let them watch." He baptized him. The people started singing as he came up out of the water. But as that man began to walk back toward the shore, the policemen were wading into the water. Roughly, they grabbed him, tied his hands behind him, threw him in a police car, and took off. It turns out he was one of the most wanted criminals in that part of the country. He was accused of killing many people through the years. They threw him into a jail cell and locked it and made sure the security was good while plans were going on for the court case and everything. 6 months went by, and one day the jailer came to that man's jail cell. He unlocked the door and he bowed and said, "Sir, you're free to go." And the man said, "What?" He said, "You're free to go. I'm sorry that we have kept you here all these months. You're obviously the wrong person. We didn't get who we intended, and you can go, and I'm sorry we kept you here." No, the man said, "I'm the one you wanted." "No," the jailer said, "you can't be. That man was evil, he was angry, he was hurting people. You were kind and gentle, and you're obviously not the man we wanted." When I listened to the pastor tell this story, that man was now a Global Mission pioneer. He was sharing hope, telling people that Jesus is coming. A few months later, it was my turn to experience what that pastor had gone through. In June of 2007, that year, in June of 2007, a young lady had knocked at the door of one of our members' homes in a very beautiful, fascinating country, but a country that's extremely difficult for Christians. We have a couple of churches in that country and some illegal groups meeting, and it was a challenging time, but one of our members received a knock, and as she opened the door, there stood a smiling young lady who said, "Oh, good morning. I'm so glad you're home. I want to know about Christianity. Would you take me to your church?" And our member was thinking, wait a minute. This is not an easy place to be a Christian. We don't tell people where we're meeting usually. We have lots of members that have spent time in prison, she's thinking in her mind. how does this young lady even know that I'm a believer? And so she asked her, she said, well, what makes you think I'm a believer? Oh, the young lady laughed. I went to university with your daughter and we used to talk a lot. The member thought, my daughter never mentioned anything like that. But the young lady was smiling and seemed sincere, and so finally she said, okay, I'll take you with me. And she started taking her on Sabbath morning to our registered church in that city, legal church, and on Friday night to a little group that was meeting in a nearby town, a church plant that they were starting. It was technically an illegal group. It hadn't been registered, but nobody had bothered them for the last year or two while they were meeting, and so she was taking this young lady 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. On the third Friday night, as the group were kneeling in the room where they were meeting in that home, they were praying together, and they heard a little noise during the prayer, but didn't think anything of it. And as they finished praying and opened their eyes, they saw that the room was filled with police. Somebody had unlocked the door and let them in. Somebody must have told them where they were meeting. So the police had video cameras going and flashes going. They lined them up all around the edges of that room. Remember, that was in 2007, not back in ancient history. They took their fingerprints. They made them sign statements saying who they were, where they lived, who they knew, why they were at this illegal meeting. Finally, the police released them after confiscating all their Bibles, all their hymnals, all the papers that they had. And they said to them, we will contact you later. And the members knew what that meant. A few days later, each of the people who had been there in the room that night received a knock at their door and an official invitation to court on a certain day. That's what they called it, an invitation to court. That sounds nice, doesn't it? But it's not the kind of invitation where you can say, oh, I'm sorry, it's not convenient for me. How about contacting me next time? You know, it's not like a birthday party. This is something you have to go to. They noticed in court that day that every single person who had been in the room that night, young and old, everyone was there in court, except that young lady. And then they knew she was a spy that had been planted by the government to find out where they were worshiping and who was there. They were fined heavily. They were reminded that the law says if you get caught once meeting illegally, it's a fine. If you get caught twice, the fine is doubled. If you get caught 3 times, you go to jail. And in that country, most of our church leaders and pastors have been arrested once, many of them twice. And if they get caught again, they will go to jail, and that would probably be the best of the possible consequences. 6 weeks later, Barbara and I were in that country. We were at that church, the official, legal, recognized church. We were meeting there with them. It was a wonderful time. Someone whispered to us during the service, we're going to have a special meeting in a nearby town this afternoon, but we're not going to announce it publicly because of security concerns. Would you be willing to come? And we said, sure, we'd be happy to go. So we went to the home in the nearby town and sat around a banquet table. It was loaded with wonderful food. We sang together. They recited some verses by memory. I was thinking, this is wonderful. This is what a church plant should be. I had no idea what had happened 6 weeks before in that very room. That all of them, 6 weeks before, had stood in that room around the edges of the wall while the police interrogated them. After a while, they had a prayer time, and they introduced each of the ones to us. And we realized that some of the people in that room that night and some in that Sabbath with us were still not Christians. Some of them were just interested in beginning to study. Some of them had only been Christians a few weeks or a few months. But here they were meeting for the first time since they had been arrested 6 weeks before. I guess they thought maybe that with an American visitor they weren't in danger. I'm not sure. But they said they were determined that they were going to go ahead with that church plant regardless of what happened to them. As I saw the fire and determination in their eyes, I wondered what I would do if all of a sudden I was told it was illegal for me to meet where I was used to meeting. What if my church was shut down by the government? What would I do? Would I say, well, Lord, I'm sorry, I guess there's nothing I can do? But then as I listened to their prayers, I had all I could do to keep from crying. They didn't pray much for protection. They were focused on sharing hope, on telling others that Jesus was coming. And they prayed. The translator was whispering into my ear as they prayed. They prayed, Lord, the next time someone acts interested in knowing more about you, help us not to turn them away just because we think they might be a spy. Now, I haven't had to face that before, but they do, and they were still praying, Lord, lead us to people that we can share with, even if they turn out to be a spy. And then there's South Sudan. It was 1999 in Chukadum, South Sudan. The Didinga farmer stretched and yawned after his afternoon nap and then looked down at the field down the hill. Obviously something was moving down in his cassava field, so he reached in his tukul behind him and got his gun and began to make his way from tree to tree and rock to rock until he got down to where he could see what was happening there. And sure enough, in his cassava field were 3 men digging furiously in his cassavas. They weren't trying to help him harvest, he knew that. This Didinga farmer saw 3 Dinka herdsmen digging in his cassavas. Now the Didinga and the Dinka are 2 different tribes in South Sudan that one's farmers, one are herdsmen, and just like in the western part of the United States many years ago, the herdsmen and the farmers didn't like each other too well, and the Didingas and the Dinkas have fought together for years. The Didinga farmer could see these Dinka herdsmen, and he stepped out from behind a tree, stood to his full height, and shouted, "Hey, what are you doing digging my cassavas?" The startled men hadn't expected anyone to notice them, and immediately their eyes went to the edge of the field where their guns were lying, and they realized they were too far away. So they put on big smiles, and they said, "Oh, don't worry. We're friends, remember? Our tribe signed a peace treaty a month ago. We're friends now." And the Didinga farmer said, "Right, we're friends. If we're friends, why are you digging my cassavas?" And he turned and started to run back up the hill. Immediately, they showed what kinds of friends they were. They dove for their guns and started shooting at him as he ran up the hill. But he was able to dive behind some rocks, and in their haste, they weren't very good aim, and he didn't get hurt. But he slid along behind the rocks and bushes till he could poke his gun out and start shooting back at them, and he injured one of them. He hit him and injured him, and immediately his friends grabbed him by the arms and began dragging him down the hill, zigzagging as they ran. Once they were out of gunshot, they picked him up and took him to a clinic, but they were furious. They had to find revenge. So these 2 Dinka herdsmen, they didn't stop to think that this was all their fault because they were stealing the cassavas. They just had to get revenge. They went out and started walking through the city, and they saw one Didinga farmer. They shot and killed him, but they went on to find somebody else. Revenge is never satisfied. As they came around the corner, they saw a Didinga farmer loaded down with his produce coming into town, but he saw them at the same moment they saw him, and he knew this was not a good situation. He dropped his bundles and raced off down the side streets and alleys, turning, twisting, jumping, diving, running like a scared rabbit trying to get away from a pack of dogs that were chasing him. As he skidded around one corner, suddenly he realized he had made a terrible mistake. He was trapped. There were high buildings and walls all around him. There was nowhere to go. So he put his hands on his head and waited to die. And sure enough, as the Dinka herdsmen came skidding around the corner, they realized they had him trapped, so they paused and raised their guns. But just then a door slammed, and a Dinka lady raced out of the house, threw her arms around this Dinka farmer, placed herself between the farmer and the herdsman, and looked back at them and said, "Go ahead and shoot, but you'll have to kill me too." And these Dinka herdsmen were furious. They yelled and swore and called her all kinds of indecent names, but finally their anger was spent and they stomped off. And then she let the Dinka farmer go, a man that she had never met before, had no idea who he was just a man in need, and she had rushed out to help. Turns out that Rebecca was not an Adventist. She was not even a Christian as far as we know, but she had worked with ADRA for 2 years in the ADRA projects around Trecartin, South Sudan, and Rebecca had been fascinated by what she had seen. Most of all, she was amazed that people from all different nationalities could work together. She'd never seen anything like that before. She saw Americans and British. She saw Rwandans and Somalis. She saw Kenyans and Ugandans, Canadians, all working together for everybody. And it just boggled her mind how people could do that. So she started staying by in the evening when her regular work was done. She would hide in the bushes and watch, what is it that makes these people different? She saw them sitting around their fire at night, and they would sing. She heard them reading from a book. She would hear them talking to somebody, and sometimes they would be looking up, and sometimes they would close their eyes, and she couldn't see who they were talking to. But little by little, it was impacting Rebecca's life and changing her to the point where one day she was willing to risk her life for a man she had never met. There are 3 stories. One about a pastor wondering if he should stay and help people after being threatened. One about a member trying to decide if she should take a young lady to church with her. And one about a lady who had to make a split-second decision to risk her life to save an unknown man. Maybe you've been in situations like that, where you wondered what you should do. Who should you help, or who shouldn't you help? Would it be help, or wouldn't it be help? You know, we've all seen a blind man with a can. We've seen mothers walking between cars with babies. We've seen red-eyed, dirty men staggering through the metro station saying, "Please, can you give me some money for milk for the baby?" And we're thinking, yeah, that's not probably what you would buy if I gave you any money. We've seen panhandlers at street corners saying they'll work for food. Maybe you've seen a broken down car full of scuzzy-looking teenagers, or a migrant family walking along the road with their bags of groceries, or a new family in town, or a coworker crying in the next cubicle. Whatever it is, we all have met people and been in situations where we wondered if it's really our responsibility to try and help. And every time we do, I can almost guarantee that a certain Bible story comes to your mind. You can find it in Luke chapter 10. It's the story of a man who asked Jesus a question, and Jesus answered it with a story. It's the story of the Good Samaritan. Let's start reading it with Luke 10 and beginning in verse 30. Jesus replied with a story. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along. But when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he took care of him. You know the story, don't you? You've read it many times. Have you ever gone to bed that night like I have, thinking, Lord, I'm sorry, I was like the priest today. I didn't even slow down. Or Lord, I was like the Levite today. I slowed down and looked, but I didn't stop. Maybe sometimes you felt like the man in the ditch. Life has left us bruised and beaten. People seem to have taken advantage of us. Nobody seems to care. They all seem to pass by without even stopping. We understand those various roles in the story. And we know very well that when Jesus asks his question in verse 36, who was his neighbor, we know what we should answer, don't we? The one who showed mercy. And by that we mean the Samaritan, don't we? But there's one more person in the parable. One more person that showed mercy. Did you notice that I skipped verse 35? Where Jesus introduces a new person to the story? Verse 35 says, on the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, take care of him, and whatever more you spend when I come again, I will repay you. Now, who does the innkeeper represent? What purpose does verse 35 have in this story? Why does Jesus introduce another person to the story? He doesn't need him. It's already clear in our minds that we should be like the Good Samaritan, right? Why does he put verse 35 in there? You know, back when I was in school, in the lower grades, if the teacher assigned me to write a 3-page paper, I wrote as big as I could write. You understand why. If when I was in college, Dr. Spence, when I was in college, if the teacher assigned a 2,000-word essay, I talked about everything that was remotely related to what the topic of my paper was. Why? Because I was trying to fill up space. Is that what Jesus was doing in this story? Was he trying to fill up space with verse 35? You know, did Jesus have a certain allotment, a certain word count that he had to reach? No, of course not. I believe that Jesus had a purpose for everything he said. So I believe there's a purpose for verse 35. But before we look at the reason, I want you to think with me a minute about a few other illustrations that Jesus used during his few years of preaching. Jesus says that we are to be, what? We hold up our finger and sing a little kid's song, this little light of mine. Jesus says we're to be lights, right? But who's the light of the world? It's Jesus. Jesus says we're to be like sheep, but who's the Lamb of God? It's Jesus. Jesus says we're to be shepherds to the flock that he's given us, but who's the good shepherd? Jesus. And I would like to suggest that we are to be like that Samaritan neighbor, but that he is the Good Samaritan. And if he's the Good Samaritan, could it be that in this parable we are the innkeepers? I want you to think about it for a minute. Day after day we go about our work, checking people in and out of our hotels, so to speak. Maybe for you it's cleaning rooms. Maybe it's wheeling patients in and out of surgery. Maybe it's fixing teeth or inserting IVs or crunching numbers in the back office somewhere. Maybe it's stocking shelves in a grocery store or running a cash register at Penny's. Maybe it's preparing lesson plans or chairing meetings or driving busloads of kids to and from school or fixing phone lines or dealing with fires and community emergencies. Maybe it's studying for exams and writing papers for teachers. Or maybe you're a mom and you get up early and rush around in the morning getting everybody and yourself off for the day. You work hard all day and then come home and have to prepare dinner and try to regroup and start all over. And all night long you're feeding the baby over and over. But in the morning you're supposed to smile and be cheerful and on top of everything. Whatever it is, we know what it's like to go through life with as much as we can possibly stand. We can't take another thing. We are so busy, we are so stressed, we are so strapped and tired. And then it seems, in the midst of that hectic routine, when we barely have enough energy or money or time to keep up with what's already going on, the Good Samaritan comes. And he doesn't just want a room in our inn. He's bringing somebody into our lives. You know what that's like, don't you? He's bringing somebody into our lives that we feel like we can't handle right now, if we ever could. And we cry out, Lord, not me. Please send somebody else this time, Lord. I don't have the time. I don't have the money. I don't know their language. I don't understand their culture. I don't even like the smells that come out of their house at mealtime. Lord, not me. Send somebody else that understands them and can deal with them better than I could. But the Good Samaritan doesn't stop with just coming and bringing someone. He has the audacity to lay some coins on the table and saying, I'm giving you what you need to take care of them. Now I want to ask you a question. What nationality was the innkeeper? The Bible doesn't say. And it really doesn't matter. So I'd like you to imagine for a minute that he was a Jew. Let's assume he was a Jewish innkeeper. He's standing at his counter shuffling papers or whatever innkeepers do. And the door opens and there stands a hated Samaritan. You remember how much the Jews and the Samaritans hated each other. If you think it's bad between the Israelis and the Arabs today, it was that way back then too. Here's this Jewish innkeeper with a hated Samaritan at the door. Not only that, he's dragging with him a half-dead Jew that he claims he found in the ditch and saved his life. Yeah, right, the innkeeper would have been saying. You Samaritans are all a bunch of liars. I know you just beat him up around the corner and now you're wanting to dump him off on me so you can escape. If he was a Jewish Samaritan, he had a problem, didn't he? A Jewish innkeeper, he had a problem. But let's assume for a minute that he was a Samaritan innkeeper. He's standing there at his counter busily shuffling papers when the door opens and there in the bright light is a stupid Samaritan. Oh yes, he's a Samaritan, but what a stupid one. He's dragging with him a half-dead Jew and he wants to put the bloody guy in my clean sheets. Why didn't he just leave him out there by the road to die? One less Jew would have been good for the world. That's what a Samaritan innkeeper would have thought. You know, either way, that innkeeper has a problem, doesn't he? Either way, the Good Samaritan is asking that innkeeper to cross cultural and ethnic and linguistic and socioeconomic boundaries and deal with someone that no one else he knew would be willing to deal with. Jesus, the Good Samaritan, comes to us often and asks us to step out of our comfort zone to deal with somebody who is not like me. That's hard for us. We're sort of okay to deal with people like us, but the people not like us, oh, let's leave them for the other church, Lord. Let the Ghanaian church take care of them. Let the Spanish church take care of them. Let the Filipino church take care. Not me, Lord. But the Good Samaritan comes, and he doesn't say it will be easy. He doesn't say it will be comfortable, but he asks us to take care of the people that he's placed within our sphere of influence. And he says, I've given you what you need to take care of them. Do we believe him? She was 5 years old, too young to be a missionary. At least that's what everybody thought. Her family was involved in a program called Kids in Discipleship. Maybe you've heard of it, a program that mentors parents, teaches them how to mentor and disciple their children and together reach out to their community. The group was planning a mission trip to a Latin American country. They were all training and making preparations, except for the little 5-year-old. She was too little. She just ran around and played. Finally, the day came, their plane took off and landed in that Spanish-speaking country, and everybody went to work doing their assigned tasks, except the little 5-year-old. She was too young to have any assigned tasks. She just ran around and played. But one day, in the middle of a vacation Bible school that her mother was leading out in, that little girl suddenly stood up and walked out the door, and the mother was frantic. She couldn't stop the VBS program, but she couldn't let her little 5-year-old wander off across a strange country either. So she motioned to one of the elders to come, and she whispered, you don't have to do anything, just don't let her get lost or hurt or something. So he followed the little girl out across the vacant lot, over to some huts on the other side, and stood nearby, not interfering, but just listening while the little girl talked for 15 minutes to 2 or 3 kids over there about Jesus. Then the little girl came back in and sat down in the meeting and the VBS program, and as it finished, the elder came up to the mother and he said, "I didn't know that your little girl spoke Spanish." And the mother said, "No, she doesn't speak Spanish. We've never lived near anybody that speaks Spanish." He said, "I just listened to her talk to those kids for 15 minutes in beautiful Spanish." "No," the mother said, "that's impossible. You just understand both languages and you got mixed up in which one you were hearing." He said, "No, I'm pretty sure I know the difference between Spanish and English." And she was speaking Spanish. And the mother said, "Honey, come here a minute. Where did you go a few minutes ago?" And the little girl said, "Oh, Mommy, Jesus told me those kids didn't know about him and I should go tell them." And Mommy said, "That's nice, but how did you do it? You don't speak Spanish." And the little girl, with a look on her face that only a 5-year-old can give to an adult who just isn't getting it, said, "But Mommy, Jesus told me to go, so I went." And Jesus stuffed the words in my mouth. But she said, "I'm tired of talking Spanish now," and she ran off to play with her English-speaking friends. Oh, that we would have the heart of a child. That we would believe the Good Samaritan when he says, "I have given you what you need to take care of them." No matter what country or culture or language they come from. You know, recent research has shown that even here in the United States, where we have quite a lot of freedom, 77% of the Hindus that live around us, millions of Hindus live here in the United States, 77% of them say they don't know a single Christian personally. They work as doctors and nurses in our hospitals, they manage hotels, they run restaurants, but they don't know us, and we don't know them. 64% of the Buddhists in the United States say they don't have a single Christian they can call a friend. They take our clothes at the dry cleaners, they wait on us in the Asian restaurants, they build computers and analyze complicated scientific data, they cut our hair, but they don't know one of us that they would trust enough to come to if they had a question. 33% of the Muslims in the United States say they don't have a single Christian friend. And that's only low because quite a large number of Muslims in the United States used to be Christians. The African American community, there are many that have become Muslims, and they grew up in Christian homes and with Christian friends. So in the surveys, they say, "Oh yes, I have some Christian friends." But if you were to go around the rest of the Western world, Europe and Australia and the rest, it's still 70% of the Muslims who say they don't have a single Christian friend, even in our free Western countries. The Good Samaritan sometimes comes and asks us to go out of our comfort zones to help his children. But when he does, he always says, "I am giving you what you need to take care of them, and whatever else it costs, whatever other sacrifices you are asked to make, I will repay you when I returned. It was my first time driving on the wrong side of the road. Some of you have grown up in countries or traveled in countries where they drive on the other side of the road, and to me that was wrong, to them it was right. But it was my first time, and yet it didn't really matter because we had just turned off the main road and were out on a dirt track that wound its way through the bush country of Zambia. Our four-wheel drive vehicles were clawing their way up and down the dirt track and the hills out through the bush. We passed lots of little communities and finally came to a beautiful outpost called Lushomo. It was a little mission outpost, way out in the middle of nowhere. There was a school, a clinic, a church, a nice church. I would have guessed it could maybe fit a couple hundred people. And then I said, well, wait a minute, I'm in Africa. Maybe it could fit a lot more people than that. But I asked them, how many people go to church here each Sabbath? And they said, oh, not many, Pastor. And I laughed and said, yeah, not many. You think if there aren't 500 people, there aren't many. They would think this was not many. They said, I said, you put 20 people in a 7-passenger van. They laughed and said, yes, but on Sabbath, there's only a handful in this church. And I said, then what's wrong? Because you obviously have lots of people working here, lots of staff members and families and a school. Why are there only a few people in church every Sabbath? They explained that they divided up into teams every Sabbath morning. And they said we'd go to every house within a 4-hour walk, and we hold branch Sabbath schools or give Bible studies every Sabbath. And I said, let me get this straight. You walk for 2 hours and hold a branch Sabbath school and walk for 2 hours back. And they said, I was feeling guilty already because 15 minutes is a long way for me to go on Sabbath morning. And they said, oh no, Pastor, we walk for 4 hours and then we have a branch Sabbath school or a Bible study and we walk for 4 hours back, and we would go further, except that it's too dangerous to be out after dark in this part of the bush. I was amazed as I thought about those people. They didn't have cars, they didn't have motorcycles or even bicycles, but they believed the Good Samaritan, and they said, he must have given us what we need to reach the people around us. We have legs, so those with longer, stronger legs walked further, and those with shorter, weaker legs walked closer, and they were covering every home within a 4-hour walk every Sabbath. And we wonder why the church is growing so rapidly in some of those countries. I was still in awe as we strolled through the fields of sesame seeds and down into a clearing. And in the clearing I saw a large tree and a little gravestone underneath the tree. I walked over to the gravestone expecting to see the grave of a grizzled old pioneer missionary. But tears came to my eyes as I noticed an 18-month-old American baby's name on that gravestone. I asked a few questions and learned that the young American couple had come as volunteers. They had brought their baby to this primitive outpost. They'd worked hard. They'd learned to love the people loved them. Things were going well. God was blessing. And then one day, while the father had the only mission vehicle in town getting supplies, the baby came down with a violent case of malaria and died before the father could get back. They buried him there under the tree. What a sacrifice. I forgot all about that story over the next few years, and one day I was preaching at a church in Tennessee. During Sabbath school, I had told some stories of sacrifices that missionaries make, and of the question that agonizes in their minds over and over, is it doing any good? Am I making any difference? I'd told a number of stories, but not that story. And as I finished, a young lady came up to Barbara and me, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. She said, I've asked myself that question over and over. What difference does it make? Was I doing any good? She said, my husband and I were volunteer missionaries in Zambia, and our baby got malaria one day and died, and we buried him under a tree. And suddenly I was crying too, because I realized I had stood beside her baby's grave. She had left him there, waiting for Jesus to come. Now, some of you have left family behind to go where you feel God has called you. Some of you have buried children or relatives in other countries. Some of you have lived here all your life. Many of you give your tithes and your mission offerings faithfully, and you wonder, you take time in your neighborhood, and you wonder, are those things making any difference? Is it doing anything for God, or are we just continuing on in the same old rut we've always been on? Are these sacrifices making any difference? And I want to remind you that the Good Samaritan says, I've given you what you need for today. And whatever other sacrifices you make, money, time, family, health, whatever other sacrifices you make, I will repay you when I return. Can you picture that day with me? As we stand there on the sea of glass, will we be pulling a card out of our pocket and saying, let's see, did he pay me back for that one yet? There was that time. I wonder if he's paid me back for that. I don't think we're going to be asking that question, will we? We will realize on that day that heaven was cheap enough. My prayer is that the Good Samaritan will help us to be faithful innkeepers today, trusting that he's given us what we need for the people he's brought into our lives, and that whatever other sacrifices we make, he will repay us when he returns. Amen.